So this topic is going to be on environmentalism and such. Elaborations thereon. It was brought to light essentially with a brief conversation between Kurt and myself in a post that he presented in his Facebook, in which it was presenting the idea that Gaia is, in a sense, more complex than the human. And this is a common theme in sort of postmodernism, I believe, sort of a back to nature kind of mentality. And it's understandable, and I'm not saying I'm necessarily right. This is just my position on it from what I've studied and believed and such. From reading, like, I studied environmental ethics, and it's similar. I'm going to present an idea that's similar to what Sean Hargens presents in Integral Ecology. So in essence, what I believe could be happening in a lot of the postmodern move, a lot of the environmentalist move at this time, is confusing what you might call heaps with holes. So, you know, a simple and overly simple example, and I really believe this is overly simple, is, you know, taking this book and a dog. So in this case, this book is made up, for example, of molecules, and it was really constructed by a human, right? Like, it was put together with intention by a human, but came from trees and such, ink, other things. But so you have a collection of atoms together that make up this book, but as a whole, it's not intelligent, and you might call this therefore a heap. This is just a philosophical distinction, and then we'll use this later. Whereas a dog, when it gets up and moves about, you know, all of its being moves about with it. So what I do think, and this is where I distinguish myself a little bit from maybe the typical philosophical position on this, or what you might call the more cutting-edge philosophical position on this, I believe, is so they're going to make a radical distinction between the two. So that you know, a dog is a sentient being, and, you know, a book isn't sentient, and plants are, you know, sort of, but not really. That sort of thing. You get the gist, right? So when you get to a planet, it's not sentient, and like this book, it's pretty much just a giant heap, although the organisms living on it are very complex. And so in that sense, a plant is more complex than the earth. And I do tend to actually agree with that. That, you know, you needed the earth first, and the requirements of the earth and such. But the complexity that you see in a plant, in a fairly real sense, is actually probably more complex than the earth itself. Now, it doesn't, what I mean by this is you got to take this, there's a big balance here that has to take place. The earth is absolutely foundational, so if you F with the earth, you're Fing with all organisms on it. And so in that sense, I'm sort of still a Gaianist. I still kind of believe, you know, that, you know, we gotta treat the earth, you know, as sacred, or whatever you want to call it, absolutely essential. But as the humans, we actually are the guiding, we're like, you might look at it like the captains of this ship, in a sense. Now, it's not to overinflate our ego as this, but it's actually really a big responsibility, because we can either F it up, or we can do it quite responsibly and treat all organisms on the planet as sort of important, and having their right place to thrive and live and interact and mesh and flourish. The diversity is actually power, and the greater the diversity on the planet that we see, the more stability we will have as a human community, the more, I think, fullness in life we will experience therefrom and such. So it's absolutely essential to have sort of, I believe at this time, sort of an environmental ethic that spills out of you. One thing that I do believe, and this is getting back to that little distinction that I believe is where I differentiate myself from a lot of these, I believe, cutting-edge environmental philosophers, and I mean that in a very good way, a positive way, at least that's my interpretation, is the idea that there is, in fact, potentially a deep sort of geometry in the nature of reality that our science is still not really picked up on, and I don't fully understand it, but something to do with even the placements of the planets. Probably has something to do with, I believe, electromagnetism. For example, the relationship between the Earth and the Sun, and the electromagnetism between the two, I think is something that either isn't being talked about intentionally, or isn't being talked about potentially because there's energy losses that oil companies and the kind of global corporate economic system could lose from by having this information get out. So I hope that distinction was clear, and I don't, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I do feel somewhat confident that something like the bright green movement makes a lot of sense to me. It's the idea that, okay, if we don't go back to nature, then how can we still remain highly environmentalist? And the way you would look at it, if you take that serious, is that we with our rational abilities actually must act as sort of like zookeepers, but zookeepers in the sense that we are part of the zoo, radically part of the zoo. My finger is part of nature, and therefore we are all part of this zoo. And so we have to create this zoo in a way that enhances all life, enhances, flourish, diverse, etc. But the Earth itself, as just that physical structure, is one of the lowest orders of complexity, I believe, in the universe. Again, it's not to undermine it. It is required, it's foundational to have higher levels of complexity come from it. But in that sense, I think it is maybe the lowest. Any questions, comments, follow-ups would be awesome. Blessing. Blessing.